Hello everyone, my name is Muzeche Kalua. Welcome to this video series titled Dependency Injection in ASP.NET 6 Deep Dive. I am a senior software engineer and a strong advocate of .NET. Welcome to the second video of this 5-part series. Today we're going to discuss the Microsoft Dependency Injection Container. So we'll dive deep into things like lifetimes, and then we're going to have a demo on how we can actually inject your configurations from your JSON file. So what is the Microsoft Dependency Injection Container? So we'll see that .NET 6 comes shipped with a built-in dependency injection container, and this should be good news because you don't have to worry about setting your own container. You can just start using it. Although in our last video of this series, we're going to see how we can change the container, but out of the box, it's there. All right. So what it does is it just resolves services, okay, during runtime. So it sees your abstractions and your implementations. So it resolves. Okay, I'm going to take this abstraction. I'm going to give it this implementation. All right. So it's simply a software component that manages how you instantiate and configure your objects in an nutshell, right? So let's go a little bit deep on the container. You'll see that you register services at startup, okay, but they'll be resolved until runtime rather. You'll see that most of the errors to do with the container will be seen at runtime because that's when the resolving is done. All right. So the container is more of an on-demand. Okay, it creates, it disposes, okay, of instances, and they are tied to a lifetime, which we'll cover at the end of this video. So by default, it has its functionality is limited, but that's done on purpose. Okay, and we're going to see in the next video that we can actually extend the container to actually do a lot more. All right, so I think they try to minimize so it doesn't overwhelm you. You can just use what can be used, and then once need be, you can go ahead and extend it. So what things are used by this container? You see that the environment that hosts your app, it uses dependency injection. We're going to an example here about configuration. It also uses the DI container. Things like logging, the iLogger uses the container. Routing, even MVC itself, you would see that it uses the container. Now the question would be, as you're building your apps, okay, what can you register in your containers, right? And the first thing you need to do is identify dependencies. For instance, you would see the new keyword. Okay, so like in the last video, we had we knew double class in a controller before we did our dependency inversion of control. You see that once you see that new keyword, the next question should be, is it a dependency? In our case, it was a dependency because that was a class that accessed data. It was within another class, so that object was a dependency. If it was, then we apply the dependency inversion control, where we said, okay, fine, we're going to inject the dependencies at runtime, and we're going to use abstractions, which in our case were interfaces. And once we did that, we went ahead and the service was registered in our dependency injection container. And you repeat, and you keep on doing that until your application is at least clean of these dependencies or the coupling is less. Do not register primitive types. Sometimes you're tempted to register strings. Do not. Those are good for configuration. So strings and all the others of primitives, it's a no-no in a dependency injection controller. So now let's do a little bit of a demo. I see in most tutorials that people just use the configuration to get things from the configuration file, okay, but the best way to do them is to use dependency injection, and I'm going to show you how we do it as we code. All right, so let's head over to Visual Studio and see how we can actually do this. All right, so here we are in Visual Studio. I want you to select create a new project. We're going to create a web API project, so click next. Call it configuration dependency injection. click next, and just leave it as it is. So what we're trying to do here is to show ourselves how do we use configuration files via dependency injection. I have seen so many tutorials whereby guys they have the config file, which is the app settings.json. I'm gonna just open it here, this one. So if they want to get a configuration from the app settings.json, they'll use the dir container they use the configuration objects to get this thing straight, and they use it in code. If you've watched the first video, you know what DI helps us with. So we want to follow it consistently. So what I want you to do is not to do what most tutorials do, whereby they just take the value from the configurations and just use it in code. I want you to actually inject it at runtime, so that you follow the DI principles, and you're able to efficiently use that value. So first of all, we're not going to change anything. We just want to show you how we can actually implement. So I want to run this application the way it comes. So it comes out of the box. If you click the get, try it out, then you click execute, it's going to give you a bunch of an array of other forecast. Okay, so we're not going to change anything. All right, we just want to see how we can bring our values from the config using dependency injection. Now, when is this useful? For instance, there will be times where you want to have, let's say, in your test environment you want to use an in-memory database, and in your live environment you want to use an actual SQL Server database. So how do you put a flag so that should give you the flexibility, so that when you're hosting it, you just change a flag? Okay, there will be things like you might want to store database connection strings, all right, stuff like that. So for this particular example, what we're going to do is we're going to assume that this API should only run on a live server. If not, it should say bad request. Okay, so I want you to create a folder here, call it config. Okay, so config is going to this config folder, config, it's called config, and I want you to create a class called environmental configuration. So this class, what it's going to do is it is going to hold related configurations, right? So call it environmental configuration, because now environment in this case means live or production. Environmental configuration, if I can spell that, configuration, right? So unlike the regular way where you just pick it from the app settings, here we want to tie it to this plain old C# class. People call them purpose, and I'm seeing a typo over there. Might as well fix it now. Configuration. All right, so what flag might we want to know? So I think, so here you're going to store related configurations. All right, so we're going to have a flag which is going to be a boolean. It's going to see if it's live. Okay, again, you can put a lot here, but we just want to see if it's live. Right, that's your first step. Okay, that's our class that will represent the config file in our actual C# in our C# code. Now let's go to the app settings.json, and we're going to create a new section. Okay, I'm going to call it environment, right? And this is going to be an array, no, sorry, an object rather. And then it's going to have this. Okay, so you're going to have that flag is live. Okay, so by default it's going to be false because we are in development mode, right? So we're going to give it false, and we don't put that. Okay, now we have our app settings.json, and we have our class, so we need to link it. And where else do you think we can do that? We're going to use the dependency injection container. If you guessed that, you were right. All right, so go to the program class. All right, now in in .NET 6, you see that configuration has changed. The way you bring in the configurations, we use the configurations manager. So we're going to set up the configurations first. So you're going to bring the configurations manager. Okay, call your object of configuration. Then on that builder, you're going to add on top of that configuration. Okay, so you're adding it to that. Fair enough, right? All right, so we have successfully brought that one up. Now we need to bind the configuration. Okay, so we're binding the configuration, bind the app settings.json, and the environment configurations. Environment configurations. All right. So what do? We want to get the builder, because we want to build on top of the builder. Okay, then services, and you want to bring in the configure extension method. So configure takes in, if you can show me, so it takes in the class that you want to link with. So in this case, our class is environmental configuration, so it takes in the generic. I'm not going to give it there. I don't think it might need it. So control dot to bring it in. All right, and then from there it's gonna get in the where we can get the configuration, right? So you're gonna say configuration, which is this here, and you want to get a section. And that section is going to be where the app setting is. So in this case, we have our environment. So from this section, get that section, get whatever is in that object, right? So if we do that, well, congrats, you've successfully linked. Okay, you've linked the app settings and the actual environment, the class. Okay, so the next part is to actually do the injection, right? So I want you to go to the controller. We want to use the options pattern to do this. All right, so first of all we need to implement, or rather new up an instance of the environment configuration class. So private read only, it's environment variable, environment configuration class, and bring it in, and you're gonna call it environment configuration. All right, like so. So now we want to inject the dependency, right? And then here you're going to, so instead of you creating an instance of that would bring a dependency, right? We're going to use like I said, we're going to use the options part. So there's an interface called iOptions, and what iOptions does is it's going to resolve that in real time. So it takes in also the generic interface of what you want to resolve. So in this case, it's the environment configuration, right? And you're going to do that, and guess what? Usually they call it options, you see. And from there, you're going to say, well, your environment configuration is going to be options.value. And if you do this by default, you have access to that in our code here, and we've actually injected it, right? We're doing this the right way. Now let's see, how do we use that? Now we see that if you go to our configurations, it's a boolean, right? We have set it to false. Now this here can change at any time. You don't have to compile the code. So even if you're hosting, if you change it, it's going to pick in the code. That's why you want to have this configuration separate. All right, so now it's false. Okay, so let's create a statement here. We're going to say if, okay, if our variable there dot is live, it means it's true, then we want you to run this code. Now I want something to happen here. I'll just change it a little bit so that we can use HTTP response. Just add an action result there, action result, so we can be able to get the. All right, so here you're going to say return, you're going to turn OK. All right, array over there. If it fails, just return a bad request. So what are we saying? If the service is live, then run this. If not, bad request. Okay, so what's next? The next thing is for us to test and see. So it's on false, so I'm expecting it to give us a bad request. Then we're going to try to change it to true, and we're going to see if that is going to give us what we want. You test it out, try it out, execute, and we get a 400 bad request. Okay, so our next order of business would be to change this and make it true. Okay, so true, we should be able to run that. Right, so Control Shift F5, Control F5 rather, so that we see. And our Swagger loads, and we say get forecast. And there we have it. It's successfully gotten the forecast. So that's how you use the options pattern to inject things into the DI container and into the controls where it's dependent on. Okay, so this is the right way. This is how it's supposed to be done. All right, service lifetime. We talk that a DI container handles on demand. It instantiates and it also disposes. Okay, so for it to dispose, a service is tied to what we call a lifetime, and it's very, very essential that you choose the proper lifetime. Okay, I see most tutorials just do these things without really saying what they entail. So here we're trying to become great engineers, so we're going to dive into the whole concept of lifetimes. Okay, so a lifetime will dictate how a resolved dependency will live after it's been created by the container. So it dictates how long it will live. Right, so there are like three lifetimes. One is transient. Okay, so each time there's a request is created. Okay, so when can you use this one? If the state is mutable, okay, and it is not possessed itself, then I would encourage you to use the transient. Then you've got the singleton. So you've got one lifetime of the whole application. Now this works well for a service that you frequently request. Okay, you just want it once. You don't want to be creating it after every request. So this may improve the service. And then it makes sense if your service is stateless, meaning think of it like it doesn't hold state, like the way a RESTful app is. You send data, it's not stored on the server. Okay, so you can send multiple requests, so it's very essential. And then there's a way, okay, there's frequency which might improve it, but there's also memory consumption. If it's heavy, this leads to memory leaks, so you wouldn't want to use a singleton for memory heavy consumption. All right, and finally you've got what we call scoped. Scoped is you create once per request. Scoped is more of a middle ground. It trades between the transient and the singleton. So you should really see, according to your container, what you want the lifetime to be. All right, so finally there's something very, very important that you should consider when it comes to lifetimes. Okay, so you have to ensure that the lifetime you've chosen is appropriate. Okay, because your dependencies could also have their own dependencies, and those dependencies also have their own lifetimes. If you're not careful, this is going to lead to what we call captive dependencies. Okay, this is when you'd see a service is living longer than expected. All right, it's not good, and that's much better. At least it's living. Sometimes your service depends on the service that has a shorter lifespan. So if you depend on something and that something has been disposed, what are you left of? Right, so you don't want to fall into the trap of captive dependencies. All right, so this has been more theory and less practical, but I wanted to give you a proper foundation so that you understand what really happens when it's AddScoped AddTransient. Don't just do these things because people do them in tutorials. I want you to actually understand these things. So this is the end of this video. If you liked it, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And I will see you next time. Thanks once again for